हमारा हिंदुस्तान कहते हुए सबके जहन में कोई ना कोई भाव ज़रूर उत्पन्न होते हैं, पर जब अपनी परिभाषाओं को हम सबकी बनाना चाहते हैं तो प्रश्न बन जाते हैं। तेरा मेरा हिंदुस्तान, patriotism as a religion. For this session, I would like to request you all to join me in welcoming our very, very prestigious panel. The first amongst the names is that of Ketan Mehta. Mirch Masala. Ketan Mehta has graduated from the Film and Television Institute of India. His films have defined women, offering each character a very well-developed narrative. Please welcome Mukul Keswan. He is a writer based in Delhi. Homeless on Google Earth is his most recent book. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Roop Rekha Verma. It's really difficult to know where to start describing her. She has published more than 4 dozen research papers in India and abroad. She established the Institute of Women's Studies in Lucknow University and was its director. She is the founder director of a social organization called Saji Dunia, which battles violence against women. Please join me in welcoming Dilip Simyan. From 1984, Dilip has participated in the Sampradayikta Vidrohi Andolan, a campaign against communal violence. He is now the chairperson of the Aman Trust, which works to reduce violence conflict. He has also authored Revolution Highway. Please welcome Vrinda Grover. She is a human rights lawyer and an advocate for women's rights. She has done excessive work in rape law amendments and women's issues. She is going to be the moderator for this evening. Thank you so much.
The earlier session, and I hope we can keep some of those debates and discussions going. And I think with a panel like this, there can be no doubt that there will be interesting, eclectic, insightful ideas thrown at us. I'm not going to take too much time because we have only 1 hour, and I would request all the speakers to speak for anything between 10 to 12 minutes so that we can then have a little bit of discussion with and take questions. Not that these panelists need much provocation to think, but I'm just going to read out from a recent, I'm a lawyer by profession, so I can only deal with law. This is a trial court judgment which has recently been passed in Odisha. You would all remember the killing of Lakhan and Saraswati, post which there was violence against Christians in Kandhamal district. I will just read out to you a little bit of the judgment, and I think that may provide enough provocation to the panelists here. This is a criminal trial judgment by a judicial officer. It begins like this. Hindu monk Vedanta Keshari Swami Lakshmanand Saraswati, hereinafter referred to as Swamiji, was brutally murdered in his hermitage in the district of Kandhamal by some unknown assailants on the sacred day of Janmashtami, that is 23rd August 2008. He was a highly revered spiritual leader whose life was dedicated to tribal welfare. It is on record that Swamiji combated fraudulent conversion by Christian missionaries and a supporter of anti-cow slaughter movement. He was working for socio-economic well-being of marginalized and indigent in Kandhamal. And it is alleged that the missionaries used charity as a facade for converting people away from their native faith with alliance of Maoists, are the perpetrators and conspirators of the assassination of Swamiji. The assassination followed widespread communal riot in the district of Kandhamal, causing huge casualty and loss of public property. It is alleged that during August 2008, a threatening letter was circulated to the district administration to eliminate Swamiji, but surprisingly, despite police protection, the life of Swami could not be saved, etc., etc. A little bit of fraction of law after this. And then it goes on to say, the investigation of the case was later handed over to crime branch, and they found the involvement of Maoist organizations beside Christian missionaries behind the killing of Swamiji and others. It was found that there was a well-organized conspiracy of the missionaries and Maoists to eliminate Swamiji. It is clear that he was a protester of cow slaughter and a pioneering among Hindu fundamentalists and was looking after the education, health, and general development of the weaker section of society. And then it goes on further. I won't take more time. I just want us to remember this is not a judgment written in a writ petition. This is a criminal trial which can only be on the basis of specific evidence which tells us who could have probably committed the crime, and therefore any form of generalizations, I do not understand how this comes across in a criminal court, trial court judgment which has to assess the evidence, and they were obviously convicted for life in this case. I will now, is there any order you prefer? Ruprika ji, can I start with you? Can I request you to begin first?
Thank you very much for inviting me here, organizers. Vrinda has read out a piece of a judgment. It's important to note such trends because court is the final door at which we can knock if there is anything which we feel as injustice. But let me make a few other points before I say a little more on such judgments. Number one, I think in my opinion, India as a nation took birth only at the time of independence. All those efforts to stretch the concept of nation, Indian nation in the past, and then arouse a certain type of religious or casteistic identity as Indian is fraudulent in my eyes. India as a nation took birth only in 1947, and as the collective nation, the collectivity which is called Indian nation, the values which were cherished by the nation as a whole, as a collectivity, are enshrined in our constitution. Not that we cannot debate what is in the constitution, but I think on the whole, in general, we can refer to, if there is any crisis of values, we can refer to the values mentioned in the preamble of the constitution. Like equality of all types, gender equality, equality of various people of various faiths, people speaking various languages, etc. I think this area will not invite much dispute that our cherished goal is to achieve such equality irrespective of the difference of religion or faith or dress or language, etc. And the path which we had to take, the hope which is expressed in the constitution, and at that time I think my generation, I am post 70 years, and my generation always felt as if through small steps, very slowly, but we felt that very steadily we were moving towards sort of reformation process, a process of change in which we could have the courage of criticizing whatever factors of inequality were found in our culture or even religion. I remember, well, there are only 10 or 12 minutes, so I'll not give examples then, but I have many memories of saying things and celebrating things which today we cannot say we would be attacked. So, unfortunately, during late 80s and early 90s, I feel that some sort of regression started. There can be analysis. I have my own answers as to what were the causes of this regression, what I call regression, but maybe others may not call it regression. But, and there may be debate about the causes of this regression, the reasons, the provocations, but there is no time initially given to me to discuss that. And I remember how fast there was a trend of proving that we love our culture with all its inequalities, with all its structure, which even supported dominances of various types, injustices of various types. What I mean to say is that the courage of cultural critique gradually phased out. And glorification of irrational attachment to, irrational acceptance of total exploitative, unequal, and unjust order which tradition gave was coming to the fore. And I must hasten to add that as I understand culture, it's not a unique, there has never been unique culture. And I want to underline while saying this, that since times immemorial, India, what today we call India, within its geographical bounds, there have been many cultures, many streams, many streams of literature, many streams of ways of living, many streams of faith and ways of worship, etc., etc., etc. But when I mention this regression or uncritical surrender, it is mainly what we call this Brahmanical culture, which insists on homogenization, which is intolerant of plurality, which thinks that any sort of disagreements or critique of what has been with us is sinful. This tendency started, and with this, the discourse, which was always there in some or the other form, but in very muted form, of we and they, I and you. So this Tera Mera Hindustan, my Hindustan, is that which is defined by the plurality of all sorts. Plurality of faith, plurality of language, plurality of religion, etc., plurality of ways of expressing your sorrows, ways of expressing your happiness, etc., etc. And my Hindustan is that where no question is a bad question, no question is sinful question. But gradually, I don't know, I mean, I have my own answers and guesses. Somehow, those who always believed in having a sort of theocracy in India, I must mention what has been mentioned several times, that in fact, these people who believe in homogenization, streamrolling, they, in fact, how so much they may say things against Taliban's or theocratic systems elsewhere like Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or other countries. But I suspect, I'm not the only person who is saying this, I'm not saying something very new. It has been said that I suspect, some of us suspect that in the heart of their hearts, it is a very homogenized sensitivity, less, very, at the top to bottom dominating structure, where the marginalized people and women and minorities are not treated as equal citizens. That is the model of these people. And I think in the heart of their hearts, they are admirers of Taliban's. How so much they may accuse the minorities and some progressive women's groups that they are slaves of the West, they are encouraging terrorism by supporting minorities' rights, etc. But I think in their heart, and they might always refer to Talibani system as look what happens in Islamic countries, theocratic countries. But I think in the heart of their hearts, they are envious, not only jealous, they are envious of that system, and they want to have a country which has, so patriotism for these people is a religious patriotism. Identity as, I'm just finishing, identity as believers in a certain religion is the prime criterion for them to define nationalism and to define patriotism. And within that, beware of this fact also, within that system, they will not stop short of that. Within one religion, there is lot of plurality. In every religion, there is lot of plurality. In Hinduism, I think there is maximum plurality. But they would not, and they have shown by men, I mean, if there was time, I would have given examples. They have exemplified by their behavior, by their speeches, by the literature they distribute, that they will not stop short with Hindu theocratic state. Within Hinduism, they want to homogenize further and further. What kind of Hindu? You can't find your own definition. It will be dictated from above what kind of individual. Which deity? It will be dictated. There are umpteen examples to show that they are going to do that. And they are taking on minorities one by one. I'll just add one more point and finish. I hope there would be time to add to these things later. Patriotism. Well, I am also patriotic. I love my country, although I am very, very critical of my country also. In my opinion, patriotism, being patriotic, doesn't stop me from being critical of my country, or of my culture, or of my religion, or of my polity, whatever it is. It doesn't prevent me from doing that. Even then, giving critiques of all these types, while giving these critiques, I can still claim, I think with logical consistency, I have been a logic teacher, with logical consistency that I am still patriotic. As I can criticize my parents, my brothers and sisters, I can show thousands of negative things about them, still I love them.
Out.
I'll join
So,
you.
so I will just juggle with some of the ideas that came up while looking at this subject matter. Tera Mera Hindustan. First of all, Hindustan as a concept or as an idea is an outsider's view. It's a medieval Middle Eastern view of what was beyond Indus. So it's a borrowed idea to begin with. Religion is an act of faith. Patriotism is a product of history and geography. So they are also, in a sense, a contradiction in terms by themselves. Where do we now from here? In the next 20, 30 years, with the kind of mixing that is happening in the world over, with the kind of shrinking that is happening the world over, I don't even know what the contours of the idea of patriotism would be. Just to give you an example, my partner Deepa Sahi is also an actress, film producer, director. Her family has migrated to Canada. Her nephews and nieces are married to a Chinese, a Korean, a French, and an Englishman. For these kids, what is the idea of patriotism? I don't even know at this point of time. I can't even conjecture. So maybe the idea of nation, as India was born in 1947, maybe the idea of India was 100 years older, or the beginning of the idea was 100 years older. But it is a product, the idea of a nation is a direct product of the colonialism of that time. Till then, the boundaries of the nations were an ever-changing entity from war to war. So it's a relative, the idea of a nation is a relatively modern idea. I made a film a few years ago called Mangal Pandey, trying to look at the genesis of the idea of freedom and nation in this country. A small little incident in a British company's, East India Company's army in India, triggered this whole revolution, which we think is the beginning of Indian nationhood and Indian idea of freedom. Soldiers in a British company, professional soldiers in a British company, united by their livelihood, loyal to a foreign company. That is the genesis of India, in a sense. The entire revolt was triggered, as one of the symbols was because of the kartoos, the cartridge which was coated by pig and cow fat, an economic reason for doing it, as far as the company was concerned. Two religious symbols merged together and exploded in the face of this economics. Where was the patriotism in that case? What was the role of religion in this patriotism? Is so fluid and exciting to look at. So the idea of patriotism has been developing over a period of time. Religion is an act of faith which you can accept or reject based on your own experiences. And so patriotism as a religion is something that really starts getting scary. That's where what you are saying is, or religion is patriotism.
Patriotism as religion.
The fact is, are you loyal? That is the question being asked. Loyal to what? That is the question that I ask. Loyal to a religion or loyal to the geography and a people? In Indian context, the plurality, the multiplicity is a historical fact. You can't wipe it away at all. You may try, but you will never succeed because the multiplicity is so dazzling, so wonderful, so enriching. Even if you want to try and eliminate it, it's not going to happen. So, celebrating this multiplicity is what I think patriotism is all about, as far as we are concerned. Now, so the question that arises, I mean, right, there are trends and there are waves that happen, but the waves have continued to happen from the time when India was predominantly Hindu to a time when India was predominantly Buddhist, to a time when India was governed by Muslims for centuries, to the time when the ruling section became Christians in that. This kind of an equilibrium between the state and the religion is the power struggle that we have seen through centuries, through various kinds of states and empires. And it's a fluid, constant power struggle that goes on and which is played out, and that is what we call history. Today, in today's context, I think we need to enhance the idea of patriotism. We need to embrace the world, and therefore a much wider concept is required than a concept which is defined by a limited geography and a limited number of people.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think by default we'll just keep moving in this way, so I'll request Mukul to please.
Are you talking to that, or does this work?
I'm not sure.
It works, okay. I just want to build on things that that Brinda and Ruprekha and Ketan have. Specifically, Brinda began by reading out this passage from this criminal case judgment, which was so strongly inflected by an acceptance of the notion of being Hindu as a kind of default mode, that it told us something about the way in which perhaps the lower echelons of our judiciary think about the world. Ruprecha said something truly valuable about those who would homogenize our notion of what defines us. And Ketan pointed out this really important thing that we need to remind ourselves about over and over again, that nationalism is something, as an ideology, is something that's constructed, that is relatively recent, that is something that has its origins in the 19th century. I particularly like something that Ruprecha said, where she asserted that as a nation we should date ourselves to the foundation of our constitution. And I think this idea of affirming a republican nationhood is a very important one, even though as a historian my immediate bias is to try and explain how that republican nationhood actually came into being. But quickly, about the law. You told us about this criminal case. One of the things that concerns me is that not just at the level of a criminal case at a relatively lower level of the judiciary, but in the Supreme Court, for example, there was a very famous judgment, which is colloquially known as the Hindutva judgment, where a very distinguished judge, the Chief Justice, Justice Verma, made a judgment where he essentially argued that the reason why the elections of certain candidates should not be set aside because of their appeal to Hindutva and their promise to create a Hindu state is because the constitution merely ruled out an appeal to religion, but Hindutva in fact was not religion, that Hindutva was a form of nationhood. And this brings us in a sense to the heart of the discussion today. What are we talking about when we speak about nationhood? I think the question of pluralism has come up several times here. And I agree completely with what Ruprecha and Ketan said. I just want to make one addition to this though. The multiplicity of India, its diversity is the fact. Pluralism is always a political choice. And the larger point I want to make is that Indian nationalism, as we understand it today, is a very eccentric and curious kind of nationalism. Indian nationalism, or the dominant strain within Indian nationalism, because there are many Indian nationalisms, the dominant strain within Indian nationalism was, in a sense, the anti-colonial nationalism pioneered by the Indian National Congress of the late 19th century. And one of the most interesting things about this nationalism is how it stood the European notion of nationalism on its head. European nationalism, as Indians learnt it in the middle and late 19th century, essentially was a way of defining a national self. And these definitions were largely homogenizing, as Ruprecha pointed out, in their form. They were homogenizing principally in the sense of language. You can, if you survey the names of European nations, it becomes evident that language is very closely linked at the hip with nationhood. But they were also often homogenized through or relatively homogeneous, dominant religious populations. Now, this default definition of nationhood, homogeneity, was one of the principal problems that the pioneering leaders of the Indian National Congress, people like Firoz Shah Mehta, people like Dadabhai Naoroji, people like Gokhale, wrestled with. What were they to do with this nationalism? Because remember that these people were also great inspirations. Cavour, Garibaldi, even Bismarck. These were people who were seen to weld nations together. And there was a certain charisma, a certain magnetism that they had. But to try and apply the theorems of European nationalism to a context like a subcontinent like India, they quickly found was like trying to wedge Mother India into petticoats made for smaller European women. You couldn't do it. The problem was simply this. You couldn't invoke language, self-evidently, because you would then have to invoke a dominant language, which would run the risk of alienating many people. You couldn't invoke religion, because there was a problem with that, given how diverse India was. You couldn't even invoke a homogenizing history successfully if you wanted to speak for the whole subcontinent. And what was the ambition of the early Congress? The ambition of the early Congress was a perfectly good colonial ambition to inherit British India's colonial borders. So what the Congress essentially does, partly through a process of improvisation, partly because their values are so deeply irradiated by this diversity, is to say that, look, we will avoid the seduction of a single identity. What we will do is we will represent ourselves to the British as a party. We will claim our credentials to speak for India, not on the basis of some one homogenizing idea. We will do this lunatic and eccentric thing. We will argue that we speak for India because in ourselves, within the Congress, we contain within it India's demographic diversity. For the first time in the history of nationalism, you have a party that claims to be nationalist, basing its claim, basing its credentials to speak for the subcontinent, for this nation, this putative nation in the making, because it represents and can give voice to its diversity. If you look at the way in which the Congress works in its early years, you'll have a Parsi at the helm, you will have a Muslim, you'll have a Hindu. It's a very conscious, theatrically performed business. They want to symbolically represent the enormous diversity that is India. The census diversity of India is to be assembled into this informal parliament, as it were. Remember, it's called the Indian National Congress, in a sense, a gathering. And if you look at the politics of the Indian National Congress, there are always two streams within it. On the one hand, you have the moderates. On the other hand, you have the extremists. And I would argue that the benevolent nationalism that came out of the Indian National Congress, and the dominant one, the one that gave us our constitution, our constituent assembly, was moderate nationalism. What did moderate nationalism mean? It meant that you accepted diversity and you avowed pluralism. It meant that you were suspicious when revolutionary terrorists during the Swadeshi movement in Bengal invoked Ma, because you remembered that there were people within you for whom Ma did not mean the same thing. This pluralist nationalism, in a sense, took the British census. It took the British census and said that this jungle of India, this sort of jungly diversity of India, is what we embrace. And it invented it made the Congress into a kind of Noah's Ark, and it made Congress nationalism a kind of Noah's Ark nationalism. That we have all the human species of India within us, therefore we can speak for India. And if you look at, every nationalism needs a grievance. So the Congress is very careful, not just the moderates. If you look at Gandhi, Gandhi is frequently said to be a profoundly religious person, a person who brings a religious idiom into Indian politics. But look at Gandhi's mass movements. There is only one movement in which he sponsors a religious idiom, and that's not a Hindu religious idiom, it's a Muslim one. It is the Khilafat which he supports. His subsequent and previous movements are all based on scrupulously secular issues, whether it's SALT, whether it's anti-colonialism, whether it's a protest against the Rowlatt Bill. Gandhi is extraordinarily careful to make sure that grievances are not denominational. If you look at the Congress's program is essentially a kind of economic nationalism. What is Congress nationalism? We should all band against the British because British economic policy exploits us in various ways. So I just want to end by saying that there is another competing form of nationalism, which begins with extremism, and it's legitimately a nationalism. When we look at the RSS, when we look at the BJP, when we look at Golwalkar, these people are nationalists, but they are nationalists of a particular kind. Nationalism is not in itself a virtuous position. The content of nationalism is what makes it fertile or what makes it oppressive. So, struggling for our souls from the late 19th century onwards have been two kinds of nationalism. One, this entirely eccentric, original, and novel nationalism based upon diversity and an affirmation of pluralism. And on the other hand, ironically, given how keen the Hindu right is to demonstrate how Swadeshi it is, how Zameen se jura hua it is, ironically, a nationalism borrowed uncritically from a European idea of homogeneity and applied in the crudest possible way to this enormously diverse subcontinental context. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite Dilip Simin. I think all the speakers have really kept to time. Thank you so much. Dilip, please.
That's a very broad hint. Yeah. I think you can hear even without this, no?
Yeah, that mic works, the lapel mic works.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for very thought-provoking presentations. Uh, the first thing I'd like to do is to make a distinction between patriotism and nationalism. Just give it to me.
Yeah, I think you should use that.
Yeah. Patriotism comes before nationalism. Patriotism is just love of your country.
I'm sorry
Can
to,
you hear me?
no, only because there's a request that if you can speak in Hindi, that would also be appreciated. But keep that mic.
I'll try and mix it up.
Yeah, keep the mic.
I'm so sorry.
Ruprekha ji would have loved to speak in Hindi,
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So patriotism and nationalism should not be confused. Patriotism is love of country, and nationalism is making an ism out of it. So you can love your country without being a nationalist. Rabindranath Tagore was an explicitly opposed to nationalism. He wrote a whole book, several essays attacking nationalism. And he said nationalism is to make a population into a machine. But he was a patriot. The point is when it becomes some kind of doctrine. And the crucial thing in nationalism is that it is not affinity. Affinity is natural to human beings. You may love your village, your country, your culture, your language, whatever it is. And it is enforced. So it is enforced affinity, not just affinity. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So we have nationalism is a kind of attempt to regulate the affinity. You're being told that you must love this area and this map and this culture and so on and so forth. The other problem is that the title of this panel is Patriotism as Religion. And the problem in our country is put the other way around, religion as patriotism. This has caused huge problems, and we are still living through those problems. We are not over. There's a battle going on, ongoing battle for the very soul of Hinduism. It's exemplified by the murder of Gandhi, which now few people sort of recollect except in a very nostalgic way. But actually, the prime accused in the murder of Gandhi has had his portrait put up in the Lok Sabha in 2003. That's V.D. Savarkar. And this brings me to two different themes. One is the theme of criminality and patriotism, and the other is the theme of definition and patriotism. As regards criminality, let me just read out and I'll try to explain it later. This is something out of a book called Six Glorious Epochs of Indian History, written by V.D. Savarkar and published in 1963, but it was prepared before that. And this is freely available. It says, the Muslim women never feared retaliation or punishment at the hands of any Hindu for their heinous crime of playing a devilish part in the mutilation of Hindu women. Suppose if from the earliest Muslim invasions, the Hindus also, when they were victorious in the battlefield, decided to pay the Muslim fair sex in the same coin or punish them in some other way, that is by conversion, then with this horrible apprehension in their heart, they would have desisted from their evil design against Hindu ladies. Even now, we proudly refer to the noble acts of Chhatrapati Shivaji and Chinaji Appa when they honorably sent back the daughter-in-law of the Muslim governor of Kalyan or the wife of the Portuguese governor of Bassein, respectively. Did not the plaintive screams and pitiful lamentations of the millions of molested Hindu women, which reverberated through the length and breadth of the country, reach the ears of Shivaji Maharaj and Chinaji Appa? Once the Muslims are haunted with the dreadful apprehension that the Muslim women will stand in the same predicament as the case with Hindu women, the future Muslim conquerors will never dare to think of such molestation of Hindu women. But because of the then prevalent perverted religious ideas, in Sanskrit, Sadgun Vikriti, perversion of virtue, neither Shivaji Maharaj nor Chinaji Appa could do such wrongs to the Muslim women. It was the Hindu idea of chivalry which saved the Muslim women, and so on and so forth. In short, I don't want to make too many comments on this. This is basically an argument for punitive rape. If you want to know more about this great man, you should read up his speeches in the Hindu Rashtra Darshan and so on, and decide for yourself how great he is. Now, the point I am making is that somewhere along the line, patriotism and nationalism as a religion becomes a means of justifying criminal acts. It becomes a means of converting the pursuit of life, love of life, into the pursuit of martyrdom. It converts killing someone cruelly into an act of virtue, which we can call virtuous murder. It converts, it throws all kinds of limits aside. It throws all kinds of, the sovereignty of reason, of reasonable speech, it throws it all aside. So nationalism becomes a form of prayer. Recently, the bus taking people to Pakistan, just 2 weeks ago, there was a bus going through Punjab. It was stopped by local Shiv Sena, who forced it to run over a flag, Pakistani flag, and only then let them go. And after that, this kind of action is a criminal action. It is liable for prosecution under the law, but I don't know whether they'll be prosecuted. So you have repeatedly an appeal to nationalism and patriotism as a way of committing criminal acts. This is one thing to keep in mind. Nationalism as a mask for criminality. Then there is something I just want to tell you, with just a little snippet of history. Incidentally, Gandhi, you're quite right about Khilafat, but then there was also the Nankana Sahib agitation, where the Sikhs were agitating for, the regaining control of the Gurdwaras as early as 1922. So that was also an agitation of a Sikh, of a religious community, and Gandhi very much supported that. But he's right. I mean, these were two cases where there was a nationalist component or an anti-imperial component to those agitations. But what really interests me, and we don't have time to study it thoroughly, is that having proceeded from patriotism to nationalism, we have the emergence of a kind of language, of a discourse, in which certain people are defined as being more national than others. So this is, how if you read George Orwell's Animal Farm, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So we have certain criteria by which the nation is defined. This brings me to a sort of line out of Milan Kundera, who said that some people define and others accept the definition. It reminds me of a cartoon, which is very funny, but way back in the 80s when the Khalistani movement was going on, there was a brilliant cartoon by Laxman in which there were two Sikhs. There was one Sikh standing at the doorway, and there was another Sikh looking very grumpy and sitting on the floor with a big kirpan in front of his legs. And the Sikh at the doorway is telling somebody else, now he is not saying that we are a nation. He is saying that he is a nation. So this is very, very funny way of bringing out the linguistic or semantic problem. Some people define who is a nation. But to put it, to complicate it a little further, and I'll just introduce the theme to you because this is very fascinating. The concept of a nation state, and repeatedly people have referred to it, as a home, a national home. This is something that dates back to the French Revolution, but basically it took root only after the First World War, when big multinational empires collapsed, like the Ottomans and the Tsarist Empire, they collapsed, and nation states were made. And the nation state, by definition, was a national home for an ethnically homogeneous community. And at one stroke, the Peace Treaty of Versailles in 1919, at one stroke gave national homes to 60 million people, and 25 million people at one stroke were declared minorities. And this is a complete ideological fabrication. It's a political and theoretical fabrication that certain people are defined as minority. Even the language, we all use this language now. Across the spectrum, left, right, and center, everybody uses the language minority. Nobody speaks the name of a community. We use all kind of euphemisms like vote bank and minority and so on when we want to refer to Muslims, etc. Now, this language is a fabrication. And there's a presumption behind it that a homogeneous community has a right to a space. So it's a marriage between familiarity and geography. And anybody who does not share those particular characteristics of the dominant people living there, numerically, anybody who does not share those characteristics becomes defined as a minority. And minority is a problem for everybody, whether they're liberals who believe that minorities should be specially looked after, or they're fascists who believe that minorities are best dealt with in the gas chambers. The whole spectrum is that minority is something special. The minority comes packaged as a problem. And this is the crucible in which all kinds of ultra reactionary ideas and chauvinistic ideas, it's not the only cause of it. I'm not saying it's a cause. I'm saying it makes it easier for this whole discourse of, you know, the minority, the Jews of Germany were less than 1% of the population. But they were made into such a big hawa as if all the problems of the world are on account of Jews. They are responsible for capitalism, they are responsible for communism, they are responsible for everything. And ultimately this ended up in the logic of shunting them off to gas chambers. So this kind of logic of nationalism as a kind of exterminism, as a form in which criminality is lurking, this is very crucial to remember. So the question of violence is endemic to nationalism. And therefore, one can say that Gandhi's nationalism was so unique because he constantly stressed the question of non-violence and respect for life. That's why it is so important. It's not a minor matter. Because the conflict, as I said, is still going on. There's a conflict for Hinduism. This is not a conflict between Hindus and Muslims. This is a conflict of Hindus with other Hindus, you see. And the fate of the nation rotates around this particular conflict as to how we define nationalism and how we define loyalty and how we define patriotism. Thank you.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes or so. Yeah? Okay. कोई सवाल, कोई टिप्पणी, किसी का कुछ observation? Yeah. ये इधर.
Yes, mic is.
There's a mic here.
There are extra mics.
नेशनलिज्म की क्या परिभाषा होनी चाहिए या क्या इसकी परिभाषा है, इस बात को मैम ने बड़े अच्छे से इस बात को रखा। लेकिन हमारे यहाँ का जो पॉलिटिकल क्लास है उसका एक हिस्सा जो है, जो कि अपने आप को नेशनलिस्ट कहता है या देशभक्त बताते हैं अपने आप को, वो खुद को कहें, ठेकेदारी करें इस बात की कि हम ये हैं वो हैं, वो समझ में आता है। लेकिन हम क्यों कहते हैं उन्हें, मीडिया क्यों कहती है और इस तरह की बातचीत इनको क्यों कहा जाता है कि नेशनलिस्ट हैं, ये हैं, ये वो हैं, तो ये बात समझ में नहीं आती। मतलब वो कहें ठीक है, लेकिन मीडिया क्यों कहती है, बाकी लोग क्यों कहते हैं उन्हें, मान्यता लगता है कि मान्यता मिल गई उनको, मतलब नेशनलिस्ट हैं ये, तो ये समझ में नहीं आता। ये आपसे जानना चाहेंगे वृंदा ग्रोवर जी, और मैम आपसे भी जानना चाहेंगे ये चीज़।
मैं तो मीडिया नहीं हूँ, ये पैनलिस्ट आज जवाब देंगे। ये थोड़े से और सवाल ले लेते हैं और फिर वो लोग जवाब देंगे। जी।
My question is to Sir Keswan. You talked about difference between diversity. Diversity is a fact and pluralism is a political idea. I do not understand. I would like to understand. My related question is, no other example was in front of Indians pre-47 when they were demanding things to Britishers, right? I think one example was USA, which was the combination of n number of different people coming from different lands. So comments on these two.
We'll take one more question and then we'll ask them to answer. Is there any other? Yes, please.
I was reminded of that aphorism, patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel, which expresses a kind of characteristically sort of perhaps British kind of skepticism with respect even to the idea of the nation, of the idea of loyalty itself. So I was just wondering if sufficient effort has been made to sort of delve into the sort of skeptical traditions with respect to the idea of the nation as it sort of germinated within our own context. Were there not sort of, well, to take forward the theme of self-critical sort of outlooks, attempts to interrogate this concept with reference to perhaps local terms, and might those perhaps be fruitfully brought back into this discussion? You know that, of course, archetypal distinction is between Desh and Rashtra, but would there be sort of other kinds of concepts which might be useful while sort of trying to, and even definitions which are sort of more oppositional in nature, which might help to counter the kind of ideologically fraught definitions of nationalism which seem to be dominant? Thank you.
Take 2 to 3 minutes to respond to some of the issues raised. Mukul, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think this works.
Yeah.
You know, in response, you had two questions. The first one was the distinction between diversity and pluralism. Look, all societies are diverse. There are no societies that are homogeneous in any complete way. the Indian subcontinent, because it is in fact a subcontinental polity, is more diverse than most. But England is a diverse country, France is a diverse country, they had a diversity of languages. When I talk about pluralism being a political choice, if England had chosen to be linguistically pluralist, it wouldn't through many centuries have, in a sense, stamped out the formal teaching and learning of languages other than English, such as Scots or Welsh or Gaelic. In the same way, if France had been linguistically pluralist as opposed to merely linguistically diverse, it would have, in a sense, encouraged literacy in Breton. In Spain, you would not have had the Basque agitating for, in a sense, secession. So this is what I mean. Diversity is a fact, it's what you're given. Pluralism is something that you affirm. You decide that politically you will deal with this diversity by embracing it instead of trying to iron it out. Your second question, sorry, what was your second question again?
The example of US.
Yeah, I just, I just want to make a distinction between this. Is an important illustration that you use, especially given the fact of their motto, e pluribus, The thing is that America is a settler nation. It's a nation that was, in the first instance, settled by a very particular ethnicity, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And in its constitution, it made a virtue of equal citizenship and, in a sense, created or tried to create a Chinese wall between religion and the public square. But in fact, of course, the history of America is an attempt by the American people and its polity to try and achieve the ideals of that constitution. And in a very real sense, the idea of being American is very, very closely bound up with the idea of English or American, to the extent that American intellectuals 20 or 30 years ago were very concerned, led by Saul Bellow, that Spanish might actually find official perches in the southern United States because of migration from Southern America and Mexico. So the notion that there is a kind of homogenizing glue that binds a nation together is very powerful within America as well, despite its religious secularism. I just wanted a quick comment on the question raised about whether there were, in fact, competing ideas relating to the same domain that nationalism claims for itself. And I think Christopher Bailey's work on patriotism and nationalism in India and the way in which regional solidarities and affinities did or didn't make it into the formulations of more modern 19th and 20th century nationalisms is a particularly good and useful work.
Thank you. Ruprekha ji, would you like thoda Hindi mein bhi kuch? Can I borrow that mic? एक यहाँ पर भी सवाल था शुरू में।
बहुत, हाँ, मैं तो वैसे तो शायद सवाल दिलीप को एड्रेस था। मैं थोड़ा ये नेशनलिज्म, मुझे ये लगता है, हिंदी में बात थी तो मैं अब हिंदी में बोलने कुछ कि मुझे लगता है कि ये समस्या ये नहीं है कि हम देश और राष्ट्र के शब्दों में से कोई अलग अपने लिए स्टेट और नेशन के रूबरू उनसे अलग हट के शब्द, जो भी शब्द हैं उनके क्या हम मायने लेते हैं और हमारी वैल्यू की जो स्कीम है उसमें हम किसको फिर प्रेफर करते हैं, हम अपना हिंदुस्तान कैसा बनाना चाहते हैं। नेशनलिज्म ही है, पैट्रियोटिज्म है देश प्रेम। अब अगर देश प्रेम का क्राइटेरियन आप ये रखते हैं कि हमें दूसरों से हेट्रेड रखनी होगी या अपने को द बेस्ट कहना होगा, मैं देश प्रेमी नहीं हूँ। अगर नेशनलिज्म की भी परिभाषा में आप तमाम और चीज़ों के साथ ये वाली बात रखना चाहते हैं, उसका एक पैरामीटर ये है कि वी आर द बेस्ट। इट्स नॉट, आप वो नहीं कर रहे हैं, वो जो मुक्केबाजी का खेल होता है वो हम नहीं कर रहे हैं। नेशनलिज्म का में अगर आप ये कहना चाहते हैं कि हम देश का हित चाहते हैं, देश का हम भीतरघात नहीं करेंगे, हम वो मानसिकता के नहीं, हम देश को बनाएंगे, लेकिन इसका मतलब नहीं है हम दूसरे देशों का नुकसान करेंगे, अपने को दी बेस्ट ही कहलाने चाहेंगे। मुझे लगता है ये दी बेस्ट वाली जो टेंडेंसी होती है वो चाहे रिलीजियस अफेयर्स में हो, डोमेन में हो, कि वी आर दी बेस्ट रिलीजन, और ये बहुत वोकल, अब तो बहुत खुल के ये बातें बड़े बड़े हमारे जजेस हैं, हमारे बड़े बड़े प्रोफेसर्स हैं, वो बड़े गर्व के साथ कहते हैं, बड़े बड़े मंचों से कहते हैं कि हिंदुइज़्म इज़ द बेस्ट रिलीजन, और इसने कभी किसी पे हिंसा नहीं की। साफ कहें ना कहें, साफ भी कहते हैं कि बाकी लोग तो हिंसा करते ही रहे हैं। तो हम अगर ये समझें कि हम अपने देश के खिलाफ भीतरघात नहीं करेंगे, मतलब उसका ये होता है कि हम उसके भीतरघात का मतलब है वी विल नॉट बी डिसलॉयल इन अ डेंजरस वे, और आई लव माई कंट्री विद ऑल इट्स एलिमेंट्स। अगर ये वाला जो मैंने पहले बात कही थी, तो ये मुझे एक एक्सेप्टेबल चीज़ लगती है। और हम अगर इस नेशनलिज्म का ये जो कंसेप्ट है, इसके साथ ये कंसिस्टेंट है कि चाहे वो पाकिस्तान में अगर कोई ख़राब बात होती तो हमारा दिल दुखे, हमें उन लोगों के लिए भी हमें सहायता करने का मन हो, और हम उनकी कोई अगर जायज़ जीत है तो हम ताली बजा सकें उनके लिए। अगर उनके जायज़ जीत है तो हम पाकिस्तान के लिए ताली बजा सकें, कोरिया के लिए बजा सकें, और चाहे बहुत ही मच मेलाइंड अमेरिका के लिए बजा सकें, और हमें देशद्रोही ना कहा जाए और नेशनलिस्ट की कैटेगरी से हमें ना हटाया जाए, उस परिभाषा में ठीक है। लेकिन अगर वो पैरामीटर है तो मैं खुल के बहुत ऊंची छत से ये कहना चाहूँगी कि हम नेशनलिस्ट नहीं बनना, ना सिर्फ ये कि नहीं है, हम बनना चाहते भी नहीं और देश प्रेमी नहीं बनना चाहते, अगर पैरामीटर ये है कि हम अपने को द बेस्ट कहें।
The one thing that really bothers me and amuses me at the same time is how, what is the context in we really these days, now, raise this issue of nationalism and patriotism. Mostly it is when you are looking for either martyrs to give up their lives or butchers to massacre other people. Now, if that is what nationalism and patriotism has come down to, do we need these concepts anymore at all? I mean, we shouldn't. We need better concepts than nationalism and patriotism. I think that's what the next stage should be.
Well said.
That's very, very important. Thank you. Dilip, would you like to say something?
Yeah, well, it just struck me, you know, I'm thinking again to just our history in this city. In 1984, when some of us took out a demonstration to protest the mass murder that had taken place. We took out this demonstration in November 24th, 1984. And there were 4,000 or 5,000 people there, and it was one of the most, or the most moving demonstration I have ever attended in my whole life. And we were accused of being anti-national. We were abused on the streets because we were protesting the murder. Surely people should be proud that in the city some people stood up and said this is wrong. And precisely those people who go on and on about 1984, they were not to be seen anywhere. It was not they who were protesting, it was we Jholawalas who are derogatorily referred to as Jholawalas and communists and anarchists and Naxalites. We were protesting. So, and the national news media blacked it out. There was no report except in Indian Express on page 3. There was two or three line report saying that some people took out a demonstration. And in fact, the op-ed writer of the Statesman 2 weeks later wrote an op-ed piece saying the government should wake up because just the other day, thousands of Sikhs armed to the teeth were walking down the street demanding bloody murder, murderous revenge. Sunanda Dattare. So this is an example of nationalism being used to cover up crime, straightforward crime. So I keep repeating this. There are a lot of criminal activities that are going on in the name of nationalism. And we must speak out against it. Nationalism and patriotism does not allow you to indulge in violence, hooliganism and murder. And if it does, then you should think twice about it. And the other thing I want to point out is that there is this concept, we need apparently, this is a bigger debate and we can't exhaust it here, but it seems that the nation requires some kind of semi-religious zeal or odor or aura about it. It needs it. And there's a very simple way I can explain this. You see, in the 1980s, during Rajiv Gandhi's ministry, they changed the Ministry of Education and gave it a new title, Human Resource Ministry. Now, this, you know, the depth lies at the surface, as they say. All you have to ask is human resource for what? It seems that there are forest resources, mineral resources, water resources, and human resources. So we are just a resource. Now, what is it that we are a resource for? Some glorious thing, metaphysical thing called the nation. It's when that metaphysical nation replaces us. We are the nation. Adivasis are also the nation. People who are paying the price for development, they are also the nation. Nagas are also the nation. Don't call them chinky chinky when they come here because you say they are the nation. What happened to that? So we have replaced people with nation. This is the problem. And lastly, I would like to say, if there is anybody who has any doubt about it, Akhand Hindustan is an old, old Nara going back to the pre-40s. But the people who shout loudest about Akhand Hindustan, they don't understand one very simple thing. Akhand Hindustan और हिंदू राष्ट्र एक दूसरे के विपरीत आदर्श हैं. आप एक चाहते हैं तो दूसरा नहीं मिलेगा. आप चुन लीजिए जो आपको चाहिए.
Thank you to all the panelists and to people present here. और just to borrow a phrase जो हमारे से पहले panel था कि may the tribe of Baghis grow in this country. Thank you.